information. Okay, so good evening and welcome to the Teaching Night webinar from the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. Tonight we have quite a lineup of people who are here to give you resources and lessons, and we even have a Holocaust survivor here to talk about his experiences in Auschwitz to pair along with those of you who teach night. So I'm going to introduce the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust committee members here who have planned and implemented this webinar. I'm Laurie Schaefer. I'm a member of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, and I am also a high school English teacher. I teach at Mount Tabor High School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Yes, it's the high school that had the shooting at the beginning of the year. So I also teach a Holocaust class and English too. So Lee, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself next, please.
Hello, I'm Lee Holder. I'm a recently retired social studies teacher, also a member of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust and fellow at the museum. And I run traveling exhibits and the newsletter for the council. And also we've started up a center here in Eastern North Carolina for Holocaust education.
All right, thank you, Lee. Liz, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. I'm Liz Whitey. I teach history at West Forsyth High School in Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, focusing mainly on 12th grade. So I am the history part of this, not the English part. Welcome.
All right, and Lindsay.
Hey everyone, I'm Lindsay Jones. I work for Nash Central High School with the Nash County Public Schools, and I'm also a member of the council and the Nash County coordinator for the Holocaust Council. This is my first year working with the Council on the Holocaust, and so I'm very excited to be a part of this.
All right, thank you, everybody. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, and this is one of my dearest friends, and I have really enjoyed working with her over the years. This is Christina Chavarria from the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and she's going to talk to us about the resources that the Holocaust Museum has for teaching night, and some suggestions for approaching the text. They even have a specific lesson. And so without further ado, I'm going to let her talk about her role at the museum and what resources they have for teachers in teaching night.
Thank you, Laurie, and thank you to the council for this invitation to join you this evening. And thank you to everybody for being here after a long school day during a very cold winter. I know you've really had some severe weather lately, and on top of that, you're teaching during a pandemic and having to navigate everything that comes along with that. So it's an amazing turnout. I just, seeing everybody come into the meeting as Lee was letting everybody in, there's always a little bit of excitement just to see more and more people come. So thank you so much for joining us. And again, I love working with my dear friends in the council. There are so many of you. I also see some familiar names joining the workshop, some of our museum teacher fellows, which I hope you'll learn more about because many members of the council are part of that. And the North Carolina Council is also part of a program at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum called the Conference for Holocaust Education Centers, or CHEC for short. So we are looking forward to working more and more with the council and by extension with all of you in North Carolina. In fact, I just want to add this, that we had the Balfour National Conference begin in 1994, but there was a teacher training program that predated the Balfour, and that was NCAT, bringing teachers from North Carolina to the USHMM even before Balfour began. So you all have the longest history with the museum and teacher training. So thank you for continuing that tradition with us. So as Laurie mentioned, I'm here to share some resources very briefly with you on what we developed in teaching about night. And we know that Night is one of the texts that is, of course, most taught, especially it tends to be taught 8th grade on up. I was a high school English teacher. I taught for 9 years. I was in a high school for 9 years. Before that, I taught middle school for a year, way out in the West Texas town of El Paso, like the song. That's my hometown. And that was where I taught high school, literally a block away from Mexico. We were a block away from the Rio Grande. So my students didn't have a lot of background in Judaism and Jewish culture and Jewish traditions. And we really had to do a lot of digging and a lot of background work for them to understand a lot of the background that informs Night. But like for many of us, it was a text that students took home and they read it overnight in many cases because they were just very taken with it. So a lot of what we're going to share with you tonight was based on some of the things that I did in my classroom, because we felt at the USHMM that it's important to have resources on Night, even though you can find so many other worthwhile lessons from many other organizations. We felt that it was important as the nation's official memorial and museum to the Holocaust that we would take some of our unique collections and the access that we had to certain papers of Elie Wiesel and try to weave them into what we have to offer on Night. And also having the expertise of staff historians to help us build the timeline so that we could provide the context. We felt that that was very important as well. So teaching the Holocaust through memoir, and in this case, Night, we know there are so many other memoirs out there that teachers use. So if we go to the next slide, this term bearing witness, Elie Wiesel said very famously, he was the founding chair of the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, and he wrote the report that was used to establish the museum. So he said that we must bear witness. And so we use that term throughout a lot of our materials. And sometimes it appears in our museum quoted on a wall. But what you do see when you go through the exhibition on the 3rd floor is you see a famous quote from Night, never shall I forget that night. That as an English teacher, we like to look at not only because of what it says, but the way it is structured. So you see that quote that appears here. That picture on the right-hand side is from the 3rd floor of our permanent exhibition. So if we go to the next slide. And these are pictures that you can also find on our website. You can have this PowerPoint after this evening and you may use it. So all of our lessons now have essential questions that we hope the lessons will answer when you use them in the classroom. So if you look at the first question, how were Elie Wiesel's Holocaust experiences shaped by his own individual circumstances, such as his age? He was very young, he was a teenager. Where he lived. He was born in Romania that became a part of Hungary, and today it's now Romania again, Sighet. How did events of World War II impact what happened to him and his family? So this goes along with our guidelines for teaching about the Holocaust, where we urge educators to contextualize the history, and we've done that for you in this resource. But it's also looking at change over time. If we're talking about historical thinking skills, he changes over time because the history changes over time. And that ties into some ELA standards and analysis, literary analysis, when we look at dynamic character. Another question that we tackle is the purpose of memoir. What is the purpose of memoir? How is it different from testimony that you hear, a recorded testimony? How is it different from diaries? And what are the reasons that he gives for writing his memoir? What is the purpose of the memoir? These are all very strong ELA themes, but they're also very pertinent to teaching history. So if we go to the next slide, the resources that we've developed also look at, again, as I mentioned, change over time, dynamic character, a character who changes, who goes through changes because of the circumstances. It could be exterior changes, changes that are noticeable in how a person looks or acts, but it's also looking at interior changes. Looking at the resource list that, that the council is providing for you on resources for teaching night, Lori has included some excellent lessons that also touch on dynamic character that can help you with these particular questions. And how did his work after the Holocaust reflect his experiences? So it's very important, and we know that you're very pressed for time, but it is important to look at life after the Holocaust and his life after the Holocaust and how he took his experiences and how they shaped his work until he passed away in 2016. So if we go to the next slide, we also have, we have a timeline. We have a general timeline for teaching about the Holocaust and a lesson plan that goes with it. And we also created a specific timeline to Elie Wiesel's life. We're not going to have time to really look at the timeline this evening, but we have included the link to it. And also on the handout that you're going to get on night resources, you have a link to order the timeline, to where you receive the timeline printed out for you. We know that it's really, you know, it's a heavy lift. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of paper to print out these timelines. So you can request the timeline and you will receive it already printed. We also have it in LMS form too. If you're teaching online, you're teaching virtually, and you don't want a printed version, we have that version as well. And it's a very extensive timeline. And what you see right here is one of the timeline cards. His birth, you see what his town of Sighet looked like when it was part of Romania. And again, it's part of Romania today. So if we go to the next slide, these are some questions that go along with not only the timeline activity, but these are questions that, again, we continue to delve into as we go through the lesson. If you look very carefully, how does personal testimony enhance our understanding of historical events? And so if we move forward with our resources and go to the next slide, and we can go to the next one because we're going to talk about the second part of the lesson. So in this lesson plan, what we've done with this lesson plan is you don't have to do every single step of the lesson. You can pull parts of it that you want to focus on. But what we did is we took the introduction to the newer version of Night that was published in 2005. Some of you might remember that Oprah Winfrey featured it, and she goes back to Auschwitz with Elie Wiesel. The questions that are in the introduction, we pulled questions from the introduction where he's talking about the purpose. Why did I write Night? Did I write it for this purpose? Did I write it for this other purpose? So we pulled all of these questions in one statement here. And one of the exercises that we encourage teachers to use so that students are actively reading and they're engaged with what they're reading is for students to keep a dialectical journal. So on one side, they're quoting particular passages, and on the other side of the journal, they're writing their interpretation or their thoughts or their questions about what it is they're reading. So if we go to the next slide, this is one of my favorite quotes, and this quote gets to the heart of his change over time. It gets to the heart of contextualization, and it also touches on defining the Holocaust, which is one of our guidelines. So we take this quote and we use it in our resources, and this appeared in the New York Times in 1984. The Nazis' aim was to make the Jewish universe shrink from town to neighborhood, from neighborhood to street, from street to house, from house to room, from room to garret, from garret to cattle car and cattle car to gas chamber. And they did the same to the individual, separated from his or her community, then from his or her family, then from his or her identity, eventually becoming a work permit, then a number, until the number itself was turned into ashes. So this gets to the incremental nature of this history and how it changes over time, and the dehumanization process that ultimately leads to murder in millions of cases. So if we go to the next slide, and you have particular lessons and questions for everything that I'm showing you that goes with this, but I'm just giving you kind of the highlights to hopefully encourage you to go a little more deeply into what we've provided for you. One of the things that we have provided is to look at the many legacies of Elie Wiesel. This is a video feature that features different components of his life. You know, Elie Wiesel as a teacher, Elie Wiesel as a statesperson, Elie Wiesel as a humanitarian. And the one that we're going to watch, this video feature, and these are all on our website, we're going to watch Elie Wiesel as a writer. So Lori, if we can click on that picture on the left. So here we go.
Why do I write? Perhaps in order not to go mad, or, on the contrary, to touch the bottom of madness.
Elie wrote beautifully. He really was a craftsman when it came to the use of language, both in the written word and the spoken word. Many of his novels touch on the periphery of the Holocaust, but still deal with it. Night is one of the gems because it does not avoid the horrors, but it places them in a human context, and it does not frighten the reader away.
It's almost inconceivable that one man could have published the number of books that he published. One might have expected his productivity to trail off in those years when everyone wanted him to speak on the great moral questions of our time. But that didn't happen.
Memory means to live in more than one world, to be tolerant and understanding with one another, to accept the mystery inherent in questions and the suspicion linked to answers. Naturally, it can also bring forth tensions and conflicts, but they can then be transformed into culture, art, education, spiritual inquiry, the quest for truth, the quest for justice.
In my 20s, the book I appreciated the most was actually The Accident. You know, here is this autobiographical story of my father dating a non-Jewish woman named Kathleen, of going to the theater, of taking taxi cabs, of experiencing the American medical system. I think as I've moved on, you know, some of the Hasidic stories have gotten much more interesting to me, my father as storyteller.
And I wish people would take a look at those other books because he had a lot to say, in particularly the nonfiction, and the novels are wonderful.
One never knows what to expect in the next line, on the next page. Another catastrophe? Another warning? Another miracle? To read means to open gates and go back to ancient times and bring back ancient experiences.
Okay, so again, you might have recognized that it starts off with words taken from the introduction of the new translation, that his wife, I saw some of the questions in the comments, and yes, his wife worked with him on that new translation. So you can show this short piece in the classroom, and then you can go back and read the introduction, or you could switch it around. And what we ask you to do with the introduction is to ask your students to form an opinion and write about what they feel the purpose was for him writing Night based on the questions that he asks in the introduction. That's one of the assignments. So there are many other components to our resources, but if you have any questions, please feel free to be in touch with me, be in touch with Lori, Lee, Karen, because they're very familiar with our resources. They've been trained on how to use them. But we'd love to hear back from you if you use these resources in the classroom, how they work for you. So we do end with some assessments. We look at his life after the Holocaust. There you go. There's a summative assessment right there. And then, like I said, we do take requests if you want to use the timeline in its printed form. In the sheet that Lori has provided, the handout, it has a list of all these resources on Night. There is a link to go to the order form if you would like a printed copy of the timeline to use in the classroom as you're teaching Night. So I will stay on in case there are any questions after all the speakers, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this evening with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. And what we have the link to that presentation, as well as the link for ordering the timeline and the specific lesson plan from the Holocaust Museum, linked on what we're about to share with you. So we're going to spend approximately 10 minutes sharing with you specific lessons and resources that we have curated to be able to enable you to teach this particular memoir, whether you're in middle school or high school, whether you're in North Carolina or Canada or Poland, as I know we have at least one person here from Poland, or California or wherever you are. And one of the things that I find is that depending on my students each year, I might adjust things I'm teaching, and I always want to be able to find things, and we put it all in one place for you, right? So we're going to share that with you, and we're going to just kind of do some highlights of it, because I'm not going to go through every single link with you, but I'm going to share my screen, and Lee is going to put a link to the document in the chat. We will also send a follow-up email with the link later so that you have it. All right, so I'm going to come back over here and share with you again, and I'm going to come back here. All right, so this is the document that we are sharing with you now, and that we will also follow up with an email. So you have here the USHMM resources with here, you can request the timeline layers here. And let me tell you, having done the timeline activity from the Holocaust Museum for years, the fact that they now print these and send them to you is incredible. They are beautiful, they're professionally done, and it saves you so much time. They even send cards with all the years on them, so you can put it all up. And here you have the specific lesson plan that Christina just shared with you, and the presentation she just shared as well. So what we've done is we have organized this into resources that you may want to use to teach Night, whether it be historical context, like an activity that I do with my students about the Einsatzgruppen, to pair with what happens in chapter 1, to introducing Night. And one of the things that you can do, I use a Google Slides presentation with videos like the one that Christina just showed you, as well as multiple other ones, most of them made by the Holocaust Museum, actually, to introduce them to who Elie Wiesel is, what his contributions to society and culture were, and all of the different types of things that they can learn about him before we even begin reading. Most of the Google Slides and Google Docs are going to direct you to make a copy, so you have your very own copy. We also have links from other organizations like the Shoah Foundation and Eyewitness, Echoes and Reflections, as well as Facing History, and you'll see that down through here. I'm going to highlight a couple of things, and then I'm going to have Lee share something specific that he worked on that I think is extraordinary, and I'm hoping that you find it so as well. So last year, when I was teaching virtually, like the rest of the world, I didn't have copies of Night that I could put in my kids' hands, and I actually had a digital copy of the text, and created for each of the texts a document with embedded questions and links to different types of things that go with it. And so I did that for the first 4 chapters, and then I took excerpts from the final chapters because I ran out of time and couldn't teach every single chapter that way. But I have a lot of that there for you that you can use. We also have photos from the Holocaust Museum and survivor testimony, one survivor from Siget talking about when they were forced to move into the ghetto. And we have the time length of the video there. We've also wanted to share with you any kind of projects, assessments, documentaries, speeches that Elie Wiesel gave. If you're looking for contextual information on Auschwitz, whether it be the Auschwitz, the Nazis and the Final Solution by the BBC, here's all of them on YouTube with a companion guide. Whether you're watching the Pianist, or I like to watch Triumph of the Spirit to pair with night, the scene when they actually get off the train. And since I also usually pair it with Mouse, and we thought we'd share resources for Mouse with you here too, especially with all the new controversy about Mouse from the school board in Tennessee. So, and then we have down here other organizations who have information on teaching night. So Facing History, as well as the Museum of Jewish Heritage. So all of this is available to you. You may use it. You may ask us if you need more help with it. But I wanted to point out one other thing here, and that is this last link to the features and documentaries, where it says Anton Mason, Survivor Liberated with Elie Wiesel at Buchenwald. He actually talks about what it was like to be liberated, and then that this is where he met Elie Wiesel, and they ended up actually going to a couple of different places together afterwards. So he talks about that in that particular video, and we're hoping that that was something that you could use. So Lee, I'm going to ask you to talk about this specific resource that deals with North Carolina survivors. And again, even if you don't teach in North Carolina, this is a resource that you can use. All right, Lee, you're on.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, I just wanted to put something together for North Carolina teachers who are teaching night. And even though this is North Carolina specific, I think it's a project that you could have your students do for your city, your county, your district, your province, where you focus in on survivors who made your area of the world home. And what I did, I found 8 video testimonies of survivors who later moved to North Carolina, and I've got them listed here. And also, to make it a little easier, I put the timestamp on when they begin speaking about Auschwitz. And usually it's something about the train ride to begin with, but some of them actually start specifically on their arrival at Auschwitz. And you've got all of the links there for that. And Lord, you want to play the one, or do you want me to wait and run through the whole thing?
Yeah,
first?
let's go. You want to introduce him for just a second?
Yeah, just Morris Glass was a survivor that moved to North Carolina. And this is part of his testimony. And he is going to speak about arriving at Auschwitz with his father. And this is indicative of how powerful these resources are.
This also came to an end. And the large ghetto was liquidated. We were taken into the Holocaust, anywhere between 90 and 100 of us. I will not stand here and even start to describe the conditions in the Holocaust. But we were all taken into Auschwitz. Upon arriving in Auschwitz, when we disembarked, the men were separated from the women. My father, my brother, and myself went to the right, and my mom and my sisters went to the left. And I saw them after they passed the selections. I waved to them, they waved back, and I never saw them again. My father and my brother and myself continued walking towards the infamous Dr. Mengele, better known as the Angel of Death. We faced the selection. My father went first, then my brother. When it came my turn, he was hesitating because I was really nothing but a skinny kid. But what saved me is my father worked in the large ghetto in a clothing distribution center. And he brought me this plaid coat with huge pads, and I looked like a man, but I was not but a skinny kid. And after hesitation, he pointed the stone to the right, and I passed to a selection. We were marching towards the showers. We came into this huge room. We were told to take all our clothes off. Our heads were shaven, the underarms were disinfected, and then we went in to take the showers. After we took the showers, we were given striped pants and a shirt and a hat. When I came out on the other side, I looked around. I was trying to find my father. I couldn't find him. My father was standing right next to me. I didn't recognize my own father because he realized where we found ourselves. This man aged 30 years in these few hours. You see, perhaps I was too young to comprehend where we were. Auschwitz. How can one possibly describe Auschwitz? Auschwitz was miles of concentration camp, surrounded by high voltage electric wire. And every 60 or 70 feet, there was a tower with an SS Stormer and a machine gun. Take a minute. Auschwitz. Auschwitz was a place when there were thousands of people brought in from every corner of Europe, from as far as Greece.
All right. Lee, is there anything else that you would like to say?
Yeah, just also on the document, there is a oral history. There are readings, and I isolated the readings that are particular to Auschwitz. There is a listing of 5 books that are from North Carolina citizens that were at Auschwitz. And at the end, there is a listing of lesson plans that are specific to these books you could use. And also on Morris's book called Chosen for Destruction, just to let you know, there is my email right there. Lori just went past and I could put it in the chat. If you live in Eastern North Carolina, I have a classroom set of these I could lend you through the resource center here, and I could get those to you with some other instructional information. And if I find any more information related to North Carolina, I will add it to the document and let you know. But thank you, Lori.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. So, and there's so much in here that we could spend hours just talking you through all of it. But as teachers, what we do best is we take something here and something there and fit it to our students. And we hope that we gave you all the somethings that you need to be able to construct the best lessons that you can to engage your students in this work. We also know that there are even some counties in our state that have this year for basically told teachers they can't teach night anymore because parents are complaining about it. And so I really am happy to see so many people on here who are interested in teaching this basically very, very important text that I never thought I'd see the day when we have school systems saying that we can't teach night. And I'm very glad that my school system allows me to at this point. So we're hoping that you find this helpful. And we, of course, are happy to answer any questions you have about it. But really what I want you to hear now is from somebody who was there at Auschwitz where Elie Wiesel was sent. And so we're going to move to the final part of our program where we speak to Zev. And Zev lives near me. He lives in Greensboro, North Carolina. And you saw on the list that Lee curated there for you of North Carolina survivors, Zev's survivor testimony is also there. And so you have it in that form. But what we thought we would do tonight is we would ask Zev some specific questions about his experience in Auschwitz. We also have Zev's story on another webinar we did last year. It's on our YouTube channel, so you can listen to more of his experience there. All right, good evening, Zev. How are you? Can you hear us?
You hear okay? Yeah.
How are you doing tonight, Zev?
I will answer your questions as soon as you start asking me.
Okay, all right. Okay, so Zev, can you begin by telling us the main circumstances that led to you being deported to Auschwitz?
Well, you heard already some information from the historical writing of Elie Wiesel as to what it was like. And what I want to share with you to begin with, you are looking at me, and last month I had our 92nd birthday. What I will share with you about Auschwitz occurred to me at a very, very young age. And I was born in 1930. In 1940, the Hungarian government decided to join the Nazis. And as you know, historically, there were, in addition to Germany, in Europe, several countries, and around the world, several countries decided to join and do the things that the Nazi leadership of Germany decided to do. So as a kid, I was 10 years old when the Hungarian government, after they joined Germany and the Nazi regime there, at the age of 10, in the small village that I was living in, what happened there is that the Hungarian government decided Jews should not be able to have any liberty, that Jews should be restricted. And so for 4 years, from 1940 until 1944, we were able to be on the streets for about 2 hours every day, and with all kinds of restrictions until 1944. And in 1944, they have arranged for cattle cars in order to take the persons from the ghetto that we were in to Auschwitz. So at the age of 14, along with my family, and you heard a little bit description about what it was like, we arrived at Auschwitz. And so in cattle cars, we arrived there, and I arrived in a beautiful night. The skies were full of stars. It was a beautiful night, but the stench at Auschwitz. And I was there at the age of 14. And what was happening there, if you were 15 years or younger, 50 years or older, then you would be sent one way. After they separated men and women, among the men, you were 15 or younger, you go one way. If you are 50 or older, you go the same way. And they were supposed to be gone for what looked like showers. And you heard already that what they were doing there, they were burning them. I was 14 years old, and lucky for me, as I was walking, one of the SS guards in Russian asked me what was my age. I told him 14, and I remember his words to this day. Don't tell anyone you are 14. Tell them that you are 17. And in all the reparation documents, I was born 3 years earlier, but I arrived at Auschwitz. And because my advice that I should not tell my real birth date, I was 3 years older, so I was with the men that were supposed to be in workplaces. So when we arrived there, what I remember, I mean, it was a beautiful night, and the son of the rabbi from our community was standing there and was praying to God, Elohim, Gaim Beitecha, Timu Etecha Kodshecha. How long, God, evil forces entered your holy kingdom? How long will you let them do that? So at Auschwitz, and I've been after liberation back in Auschwitz because I wanted to see it again, but I was there that night, and I remember that night the stench. And the stench was what they were doing there. Those that were 15 or younger, 50 or older, they ended the life of more than 1 million persons at that site. So those are my memories from being there. And I don't know how, but the second question is, can I describe the arrival and what went through in the selection? Well, it's important for you to realize, and for the teachers that are there, what's important to realize is that the system that they had there was those that were too young, or in their definition, too old, their life should be ended at Auschwitz. And they had their crematoriums there where they burned them. And those of you that will have a chance to visit there, what you will see that in those sites, there were the sites where they would be processing, and after that, all the clothing and whatever people had were assembled. But in addition, what they would be doing, burning. And as they were burning the bodies, the ashes were pushed out and the surrounding area. And one of your questions is, what did I do there? Well, I was there for about 12 days at Auschwitz, and with the unit that I was, there were the 15 or 50 years of age, we were doing work there. And what we were doing, we were pushing the ashes, and we were mixing the ashes with dirt. I guess the German leadership didn't want to have the ashes, burnt ashes, to be so visible. So we mixed it up with the dirt from that area. And I was there for about 12 days until they decided to send me from Auschwitz to Austria, first to a place called Mauthausen, and then from Mauthausen to Ebensee. And I have there been for a whole year now. How did I survive this day when I was asked that question? I cannot give an honest answer. I don't know. Only thing I can say is that in my thinking cap, what I was determined, I have to do what I can. Whatever they want me to do, I should do. And I have done that. And I was not the only one, because there were other young persons. So we were doing that, what we had to do in order to get through another day and another day and another day. And those of the audience that will have an interest, we moved here to North Carolina about 8 years ago, and we have been around at various sites. And all you have to do is write my name on the internet, and what I have had a chance to speak to students, I had a chance to do that. And my perspective, you heard very important information from Elie Wiesel, and I knew him, I knew his family. He was a number of times in the community that we were in Cleveland, and I knew his family, and one of his cousins served with me in the Harel Brigade. So I knew the Wiesel family very well and met him also. But what I want to say that and you probably know from the history that you have read that 11 million persons lost their lives, 6 million Jewish persons and 5 million others. So the Nazis in Germany have ended the lives deliberately with their intentions of 11 million persons. But in addition to the fights against them and so on, there were more that lost their lives. But what I want to say that today I'm 92 years old. I had my birthday and I intend to go on. But I was 14 years old when I arrived at Auschwitz, and from there, a month later, I arrived at Mauthausen, then Ebensee, and I was for a year from the age of 14 to the age of 15. And I have done that work. And how did I survive? And how I was able to continue life? The only thing I can say is with certainty that you have to feel that you have to do what you can and not to let anything to hit you over. And you are looking at me today. I'm lucky for me, Professor Emeritus, and my history is available easily. And the main reason that I was able to survive was what I decided I'll continue to do what I can in order to just get through and get through and get through. And I worked for 6 months in an underground tunnel because the Austrian government wanted to do there to build sites where they can put things that they wanted to put away, and then in construction material production. So for a year, between the age of 14 to the age of 15, I was able to do that. And lucky for me, because again, just to share that of my community, where together there were about 2,500 families and probably about 6,000-7,000 children. There were 2 of us, my age peers, me and one other that came back alive. All the others, their life was ended. So obviously, I went on with my life and did various things, and that's not part of what I have to do. But the last question that you have here, and what do you think that can be done today to fight hatred? Now, obviously, in my opportunities to be at various schools in North Carolina, that was an important part of my presentation. And I like to have 3 elements. The first one, what is to remember? And the more you remember what Germany and their allies have done, it's important. But along with that, there are also the righteous persons. And that's important to recognize who were those that, in order to do what they could, that they believed that they should do in order to save lives and living. And one of the contributions that I can take pride in that I made both at Yad Vashem and here at the United States Holocaust Museum, that I wanted for them to emphasize righteous persons. And you have numerous lists of individuals and families that have done various good things. But the third question is, what can we do today? And my perspective, I always try to share with the young persons that they should aspire and achieve. And what should they aspire? Is to do everything that's right. And what I would emphasize is the United States is a country of diversity. We have here in the United States persons that arrived here from various parts of the world. And that diversity has to be respected as much as possible. Unfortunately, there's a good deal of energy, malevolent, bad energy that is trying to go against anti-Semitism, against Jewish person, hatred against this group, that group. And what I try to emphasize to the young persons, aspire that when you have the opportunity in your own community, in your own state, in our country, have any impact, do encourage respect for diversity and respect to make it possible for any person to live as well as they can in this country, because everyone deserves that. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I understand that I have to leave some time for questions, and I'll try to answer questions.
Okay, great. So thank you, Zev, for sharing all of that with us. And we invite teachers, if you would like to put a question in the chat. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll do the best that we can to ask him questions. All right. So I'm going to give it just a minute and see if we've got any there. And if you're thinking about it, put in. Now, obviously, Zev's story being in 3 different camps, he's got a lot of detail that he can share. So you can ask about any of the things that he's got there. We've got some happy belated birthdays. I think, Zev, I don't see any questions quite yet, but I do have a question that maybe you can answer. Oh yeah, the rabbi would like to ask you a question, and he'd like to ask it orally. Sure, Rabbi, go ahead.
Hi, Zev and Bernice. It's good to see you tonight. And
good evening,
Yeah, good evening, Rabbi.
hi, how are you doing? Okay, so you know what? There's a phenomenon of some of the times that when people survive the Shoah, the Holocaust, that they're not able to speak about it or to describe it for a certain period of time in afterwards. Okay, I never asked you this question as long as we know each other. When were you able to start talking about your experiences? At what point in your life? And was there something that caused you to do it, or something that changed in your life that made you decide that you can start talking about your experiences?
Well, that's a good question, Rabbi. And what I wanted to say is that, lucky for me, that after I served in the War of Independence and contributed to the establishment of the State of Israel, and I got a fellowship from the National Council of Jewish Women to come to the United States to get my graduate degrees, and my good luck that I met my loving partner here. Together, I had to do what I had to do in order to earn a living. And I was professor for about 40 years at Cleveland State University, and I did my work. And I have done what in academic institutions are doing. I have about 12 books. I have more than 100 articles. And what I have done, in addition to what I had to do because I was paid for it and I had to do it, I was also engaged with a Holocaust community. In Northeast Ohio, there's the Call Israel Foundation, and I was involved in doing what we have done year after year to honor at Yom HaShoah commemoration and in other occasions. And I've been invited to go around to various sites to speak about what was the Holocaust like and what do we have to do. And my emphasis, Rabbi, have been always for 3 things. What is it that we should remember? Next, 2, what is it and who is it, and how do we can respect those that contributed to save life? And the third thing is, what can we do to make life better? And again, I can brag that in the state of Ohio, I was a member of Ohio Educational Council, and the governor there invited me at Yom HaShoah to be speaking, and I've been invited around the world to speak about lessons and legacies of the Holocaust. So what we have to do is whatever we can, do the right thing. Looking at you, you have done that in your job, and we appreciate very much all that you have done, and we have a lot of respect for what you have done. And what I can say is that there is not one person that I have to turn my head away from because I have done something wrong, whether it was the students, whether it was my colleagues, or whether there were persons in Ohio. And then also the same thing goes here. And luckily for us, we were invited, I was invited to join the North Carolina Holocaust Council and become acquainted with the educational system and so on. So we have done in the years, whatever I could, in addition to what I had to do for a living, what I could do, what lessons and legacies of the Holocaust.
Were you ever afraid that people wouldn't believe what you had been through when you told them?
Were you ever afraid that people wouldn't believe what you told them?
Well, I think that that's an important question. And obviously there are people around in various formats. And I wish in some ways that instead of having the two parties against each other, that they were more united and to do what they can for the benefit of everyone. We don't have that. And again, that's what I try to knock on the thinking cap of the students wherever, or those that invited me to speak. What is it that can be done to make our life and living better? And I feel very good that I have done that.
Thank you very much, Zev, and we really appreciate you being here with us tonight. I'm unfortunately we're out of time, and I don't have we don't have time to ask too many more questions. But some of you asked some questions in the chat, and what I may do is just email them to Zev, and maybe he can respond. And when I send an email out with a follow up, I can answer those questions. So I think we had a couple of good ones, but I really appreciate everybody being with us tonight. I wanted to just remind you that that we would really appreciate your evaluation of the webinar and your feedback so that we know how to continue to make our experiences even better. So that link is already in the chat. Liz popped it in there about 5 minutes ago. It's also on our website, and I will send it in a follow-up email so that you have all of that there for you. We hope that you find all of the lessons and resources that we have shared with you very helpful, but more importantly, I hope that you find, having listened to Zev and his story tonight, will add even more layers to what you already know about the Holocaust and help your students understand. We'll be providing this recording, but we'll also be taking just the part with Zev and making it a separate recording so that if you wanted to use just that part with your students, you could do that a little bit more easily. So we also have a number of other webinars coming up. Women in the Holocaust is coming up at the end of this month. We have an exciting new Holocaust memorial going up in Greensboro, North Carolina within the next year. And we're doing a webinar with the artist next month. And we even have an in-person program on resistance and the Holocaust at the end of March. All of that can be found on our website, which I've already sent you a link to, and we'll also send it to you again. I just want to say that we appreciate your attendance tonight, and we hope to see you at a future webinar. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.